And tonight is the last night of our Lyceum series. And we've been exploring different kinds of entanglements in our current life. And after a year of some very tangled up sorts of days. And we are really lucky to have Racey Henderson with us tonight. And she'll be talking to you about food systems. And this particular program originated from some experiences that I've had over the past year, realizing that I had some misunderstandings about the abundance of food or what I perceived to be an abundance of food. And yet at the same time, as a Grange board member, being invited to help volunteer at the food pantry in Elizabethtown and finding out really, or just getting a glimpse of really how much need there is still in our community for food. And I'm very grateful to have spoken to a number of people in the community about this topic. And I think that there's a lot of interest that if after Racey's program tonight, we may want to explore further. So we may not be able to get to all of the dimensions of this situation tonight, but we're very grateful to have Racey here with us. Also, one other just quick thank you. We always try and recognize the Glenn and Carol Pearsall Adirondack Foundation, who has helped the Grange to transfer the Lyceum program into a virtual format. So without further ado, Racey, feel free to introduce yourself, and please put, if you have questions, please put them in the question and answer, and we'll get to them at the end of the program. Thanks. Go ahead, Racey.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Good evening to everybody. I will first talk about what we're going to talk about today, and then I will introduce myself because the introduction is part of the story. So first today, what we're going to do is take a quick look at your relationship to food and my relationship to food. Then I'll describe the food system as a whole, what it is and why it's important globally and in the US. I'll talk a little bit about individual parts of the system, mostly production, distribution, and consumption, and what happened when COVID hit and what opportunities have grown out of COVID. And finally, I'll end with a few words of encouragement of what you can do in all of this chaos. So production, distribution, and consumption will be the focus of what we talk about today. First, I just want to say, if there's anything to remember about what I say tonight, is this quote: "In the world between chaos and shape, there is another chance." So systems are complicated. My story isn't necessarily linear, but we have a chance to build back better, and let's see how we might do that. Okay, so who am I? My name is Racey, and I live in Reber on the western edge of Essex. I'm a farmer and a co-owner of Reber Rock Farm, a diversified livestock and maple farm in its 9th season. I'm an entrepreneur and a co-owner of a small craft business in the Central African Republic that employs about 12 women, even in the middle of what's currently a civil conflict there. I'm a humanitarian and the coordinator of a project funded by the US Agency for International Development to publish a handbook of minimum standards for supporting disadvantaged farmers in the global South, in emergencies in the global South. I'm also what I'd call a dot connector, and I love working in systems to understand how one thing or one person or one animal relates to another or relates across species. I support preparing meals for my 2 kids, my husband, and my brother-in-law who lives with us. In a nutshell, I am a part of multiple food systems. So let's now take a look at your relationship to food. Just gonna pull up the results from our little survey here. Can you see that on my screen? Can you see somebody pop in the chat whether they can?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, great. Great. So you guys answered these questions. If you haven't done so already, you can do it while we're looking at it. Looks like 61 people have answered, which is awesome. And one of the questions was roughly what % of your entire diet comes from food grown or raised in your community, by quantity, not by cost. So we've got, the largest portion of our audience between 0 and 10%. Roughly 10% of those of us on the call tonight are getting about over 75% of their diet from their community. So this tells us a little bit about where we're at in terms of supporting local food ourselves. Now, the next question was, how can consumers change the food system? I see a lot of people saying that you can buy local, know your farmer. You can change the system by educating. You can change the system with better distribution, change the system with what you buy. Earlier on here, and I'm looking for it, maybe it may have been displaced, but I did, oh yeah, boycott subsidized food. I want to call that one out because I think it's a really fascinating one that we will talk about directly in this presentation. Someone says you can change the food system through vegetarianism. And there's a lot more that I can actually see, and if people are interested in the results, we can share the full results with you at the end. Okay, let's go back. So we know that you have a diverse relationship with food as well. Let's take a look at our food system and what a food system is. Like I said, I'm going to start big and then get smaller. So what is a food system? It's a network or a set of things working together to get food from farms to our tables. So food in these supply chains moves towards consumers in a domino-like motion, from producers to processors to distributors to stores to consumers and back into the ground, hopefully. While money consumers pay for food goes to people who work at the various stages of this chain in the reverse direction. So this really situates our conversation today. There's a loop here that happens with food going from the farms to our tables. So why are food systems important? The food we eat can have a negative or positive effect on the environment, our bodies, and our communities. Food systems ensure food security, improve nutrition, and they can support livable wages for those working in agriculture, food distribution, and waste management, just for example. Food is considered by the UN to be a huge basic human right, and food supply chains both affect and are affected by all aspects of life, as you can see in this diagram. Globally, about 28% of greenhouse gas emissions come from the food system. In addition, suboptimal diets are responsible for 20% of premature mortality. That means people are dying before they needed to because of what they eat. So in the US, food systems are important to consider alongside trends in human health. Since 1958, we've seen diabetes rates in adults increase from 1 to 7%, from 3 million people in 1958 to 23 million people in 2015. Over the same time period, obesity rates have increased from 10% to nearly 43%. In just 20 years, between the year 2000 and 2018, obesity increased from 30% to 42%. At the same time, our food system went through massive changes, from hyper-localized systems prior to World War II to regionalized systems across 1 or 2 states by the late 1950s to a massive globalized system today. This globalized food system has many benefits, of course, including incredible efficiencies in transport and very, very cheap food for urban populations, which now make up more than half of the world population. However, when COVID hit, weaknesses in this system became extremely apparent. We were all shocked and concerned by the empty shelves of the grocery stores in our own communities and the long lines at food pantries. The food system became a news story nearly overnight, and its contradictions became more obvious, or at least we were more aware of them. How could we be limited to 1 gallon of milk when our dairy farmer neighbors were dumping their milk into their manure lagoons or feeding it back to their cows? Why could we only get 1 dozen eggs at a time? To understand some of the contradictions we've witnessed in the last year, I'm going to tell you a few stories about what the food system looks like in our community. In telling these stories, I'll touch on different systems components and cross-cutting issues, and I'll share what happened when COVID hit. I won't be able to cover all of these components, of course, tonight, and we'll focus primarily on production, distribution, and consumption. Oh, and a spoiler alert, I don't know how to resolve the contradictions in our system. I don't in the least have a silver bullet for how to redesign our food system so that all living things can benefit and prosper from it. I don't actually really believe in silver bullets in general, but rather, I hope that this tour will highlight how each small individual piece of the system, including you, has a role to play in strengthening the whole. As I tell these stories, keep asking yourself, how is it relevant to my life and my relationship to food? So let's start with production. I'm going to tell a story about a farm that we will call Farm LLC. It's a farm that's relatively representative of the food movement in Essex County in the Lake Champlain region. It's one of the small farms that has started since 2012 that shows up in the ag census for Essex County. The number of farms in Essex County increased by roughly 10% over the time period from 2012 to 2017, unlike the rest of the country where it decreased. This farm has multiple enterprises that are mostly livestock focused: certified organic pasture-raised chicken, beef and pork for sale, draft horse breeding and logging, custom grazing of beef, or contract grazing of beef also. It has an online retail store, pickup on the farm, or home delivery via the Hub on the Hill, UPS, or FedEx. It sells wholesale to the Hub on the Hill, a few local restaurants, and grocery stores. It actually started as a horse-powered grain and what you might call birth-to-plate livestock farm, meaning that it owned the moms of the animals and raised the babies up to slaughter weight. Both of its owners worked full-time on the farm until the beginning of 2020. Unrelated to COVID, that changed. But when both owners were working on the farm, they were on WIC and Medicaid. The owner's family eats a lot of what they produce and trades some with other farms. If they had to pay in cash for the food they eat from the farm, it would add up to about 30% of their income. So in the US, to give you a point of comparison, the average US household spends about 7% of their income on food. So that's some expensive food, or at least that's a low income. And a lot of that income is going towards food, would go towards food if they had to pay cash for it. As the farm started to do slightly better, property values also went up along with taxes, and young children started daycare. They were on the verge of being unable to afford healthcare and no longer qualified for WIC. One owner went and got a paying job. This farm has a number of part-time seasonal staff paid in a variety of ways, in kind, in exchange for food or boarding of animals, or subcontracted through the Hub on the Hill. All pay is above minimum wage. It's one full-time worker, the owner, who works between 40 and 60 hours per week year-round, is unpaid. And anecdotal research shows that this is very much in line with what other full-time operators make here in the region, somewhere between $0 per year in cash and $12K per year per person. So very low incomes for these farm owners. Being an environmentally friendly farm, this farm has a conservation easement on the land it owns that restricts subdivisions. The gross annual sales for the farm put it in the top 8% of farms in Essex County, which you can see in the table on the bottom right. This farm has always shown a loss on its taxes, on its business taxes, which for a while, when the loss was big enough, enabled the farm family to stay eligible for Medicaid. So these razor thin margins are in line with what we see for the county. The table in the upper left-hand side shows you net farm cash income from the ag census for 2017 for the counties in our region, or for some of the counties in our region. So net farm cash income is the cash that farmers take home after all the expenses and debts are paid. It's the cash they can save for retirement, for reinvesting in aging infrastructure, or for paying the farm owners. The average net farm income in most of the counties of our region is below the national average of $43,000 per farm per year. Some, as you can see, are negative and some are extremely limited. How do you plan for a stable future for your family, let alone your community, when you're working a full-time job and have only your equity to show for it? Many farmers actually bank on cashing out at the end of their careers so that they can retire. You know, sell their land, sell their business, and get that cash and retire. But who's going to buy a business that runs on willpower alone and a piece of property that can't be subdivided? So what happened when COVID hit? Demand went up. This farm sold everything it had in the freezer to neighbors who came asking whether it was legal for retail sale or not. Then it had to look elsewhere for product, which it found in Vermont and New York from other farms that had similar growing practices. These other farms' products were legal for retail sales, and as online door-to-door delivery seemed to be the safest and most certain option. The news at this time was full of slaughterhouse closings out west and the impact on small plants. There was lots of fear that as consumers, we wouldn't have the beef or the pork that we wanted to eat, and as producers, we wouldn't have the facilities to process our animals. Locally, while slaughter facilities did fill up their slots for slaughter at time of the year when they don't normally fill up, the spring and the summer, it was still possible to get slots. This farm LLC, has a custom slaughter facility, but they did not see a huge influx in calls for use of the facility beyond a few calls from neighbors. And actually, at the time, they were not even operating the facility due to a lack of labor and a financial analysis in 2019 that showed that the facility was likely losing money. So these challenges in the supply chain shine a light on the little guys. The producers that we have in Essex County that could still get product to their customers safely and consistently. Big ag lobby organizations started talking more about the importance of local food systems and considering legislation that supports both large scale and small scale simultaneously. At the same time, USDA's Farmers to Family Food Box program of free giveaways was dominating the news. This seemed a panacea for farmers. They can still sell to their distributors and processors, and the government buys the products from those processors and gives them away for free. In COVID, farms were also able to apply for payments through the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program or the Paycheck Protection Program. Some of these payments were laughable in amount because the subsidy levels that were set were based on the cost of production of a commodity, like a Purdue chicken grown indoors by the tens of thousands, not an organic product or an environmentally beneficial product. So some farms saw a significant support from these programs, but many just saw a nominal amount. However, what was different here was that these subsidies, these national federal level subsidies, don't normally trickle down as obviously to farmers for their production. It's something that's usually seen mostly by larger farms. And at least in this area, it was something that many of us had not experienced before. A contradiction that you may all have heard about at the time last year was that dairy farmers were dumping their milk, sometimes on the same day that New York counties were giving away truckloads of dairy products at the fairgrounds, no less. No income eligibility required for taking those dairy products. So think back to the diagram of the food system for a minute. As food moves around the chain, money moves the other way. Food box programs, including the state programs like Nourish New York, which you may have heard about as getting additional funding this year, have tended to contract with large processing and distribution companies, not with farmers directly. For the big guys or the national food system players, when the system broke down, the processors were stuck holding the product that the government then bought. The processors then told the producers they couldn't buy as much as before. And the producers had no choice but to dump and give away, as they either could not sell it on the open market legally, for example, dairy, or they did not have the connections with the consumers. In our community, we had the relationships in place. We had the relationships in place to address the access problems locally. So this brings us to the next step in the system, distribution. One of the things we had in place in this region was a distribution system. A nascent one and a small one, but it existed nonetheless. Small farms get their products to customers in a number of different ways, but most, if not all, require a relationship with the end user, the person who's either going to eat the product or the store that's going to sell it to the consumer. The CSA model, as you know, usually requires that members pick it up, but a few in the area have started delivery routes due to COVID. Mostly local food is delivered by the farmers themselves to clients at farmers markets, retail stores, and institutions. A few of the larger farms use regional distributors, UPS or FedEx. We are lucky here that for the last 5 years, the Hub on the Hill has been providing distribution services to our farmers. When COVID hit, the Hub on the Hill instituted new delivery routes across the Adirondacks and points south of Essex. In part, this expansion was initiated by the Emergency Food Packages Program, which I'll talk about next. But it also meant that people with no income constraints, but with low mobility, either due to age, COVID concerns, or time constraints, could get door-to-door delivery of local food during the pandemic. So distribution of food across large, sparsely populated area of the Adirondack Park is an expensive but critical service that supports this tenuous viability of our area farms and gets food to the people that need it. So transportation is critically important locally, but it's also directly related to climate change and the Adirondack Park's contribution to climate change. Carbon from manufacturing and transportation of goods is the Adirondack Park's leading contributor to climate change. These stats are from 2009, but likely the stuff category, which we fall into in the food system, has grown. So continuing our journey around the system, distribution takes us to consumption. When we talk about consumption in the food system, we talk about all the places that people get and eat their food. So they eat at home, in restaurants and institutions, and they get food from stores and from food pantries. One of the challenges that we look at in the consumption component of the food system is food security. Do all people at all times have physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food to meet dietary guidelines for a productive and healthy life? That is the definition of food security, and it is a high bar to meet. Let me read it again. Do all people at all times have physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food to meet dietary needs for a productive and healthy life? So this graph shows you food insecurity rates in our region. Food insecurity is not a new phenomenon here. Our region hosts some of the poorest counties in the state, and food security has hovered around 10% for the last decade. The latest data available indicates that in 2018, 10.3% of the population in Essex County was food insecure. We also know from similar data sets that 2% of the population in Essex County is both food insecure and does not have transportation to get to the grocery store. So that amounts to about 600 people. Food security is now, well, as of 2019, part of New York State's prevention agenda, the state's strategic plan for addressing the social determinants of health. Food security falls under chronic disease prevention, as it can lead to diseases such as diabetes, heart disease, and obesity. This is an important piece because all of our county health departments their work revolves around this prevention agenda. So if their work cannot be out of line with it. So having food insecurity as part of the agenda is a really important piece to channeling state and local government dollars to working to combat food insecurity. So given the variation in causes of food insecurity in our region and income and asset limits for certain food assistance programs, our census data indicates that share of food insecure individuals not eligible for public food assistance is very high in our region. Over 47% of households below the poverty line are not receiving federal food assistance in the North Country. The numbers on the map that are listed for each county are the total number of people who are below the poverty line and did not receive federal food assistance or SNAP in 2020. Okay, so again, what happened when COVID hit? People lost their jobs and they couldn't pay for food. News showed long lines at the food pantries. I will note that not all local food pantries saw an uptick in traffic as compared to previous years. For example, the food pantry in Elizabethtown did not see a significant change from 2016 through the end of 2020. 2020 looked very much similar to previous years. We do need more research to know exactly what drives food insecurity here and where it is worst. But it is projected that food insecurity for 2020 in Essex County will increase to nearly 15% from 10%. So this food insecurity problem is sticky. It's not going away anytime soon, but we might have some tools to support connecting the dots between producers who have the food and those who need it, while at the same time building our food system back stronger than before. One of the tools that we have is the Adirondack Food System Network. Over the last year, as COVID highlighted the challenges our food system has, a group of individual organizations and businesses came together to share information, acknowledge connections, manage trade-offs, and create synergies and co-benefits. Last week, we launched this network to try to answer questions like, if our local farmers could accept SNAP, would that improve their business margins and their viability? Would it improve health outcomes in our community? Or would it just be another Band-Aid? If we could not only capture those federal dollars that are available, but also offer a locally financed sliding scale at every CSA, farm stand, or their online platforms, would we see chronic disease rates fall? The Adirondack Food System Network is coming together to initially cover a 9-county area: St. Lawrence, Franklin, Clinton, Hamilton, Essex, Warren, Fulton, Saratoga, and Washington counties. The vision of the network is to ensure our regional food system is resilient, just, environmentally responsible, and supports improved human health. The mission is to advance innovative solutions through lasting collaborations that strengthen and improve our regional food system for individuals, the environment, and the economy. Anyone can be a general member or participate in a work group. General members participate by contributing their time and talents to advancing the mission and vision, or they can just promote and follow along with what the network is doing, understanding their food context and seeing where they can fit in. The network is guided by a steering committee of local organizations that seeks to be representative geographically, demographically, and across multiple sectors. So another tool that we have in our region is Adirondack Action and its food insecurity programs. These programs actively connect the dots between the food insecure and the farms. One of these programs, the Emergency Food Packages Program, was started in response to COVID-19 and holds potential to multiply the benefits across multiple community groups through a closed loop paradigm between producers and consumers. In 2020, this program worked with the Hub on the Hill to buy food from farmers, package it, identify needy families, and distribute it for free. The program spent $125,000 buying local food from producers in our region. this food went to 1,035 different individuals in our, again, residents of our regions, in what amounted to 64,000, roughly 64,000 meals. So the emergency food packages program is now transitioning into a more sustainable solution through the fair food pricing program. Through this program, families can qualify for discounts. They receive a discount code, and then they use their code at local food vendors who meet FFP's, the Fair Food Pricing Program's, eligibility criteria. Fair food pricing vendors' eligibility criteria includes buying principles. As much as possible, fair food pricing hopes to support farms and producers that are using environmentally beneficial production methods and fair labor practices. Local dollars donated to the program have a multiplier effect, and they support local businesses that create jobs, bring new families to the area, and hopefully are also able to pay their owners, while at the same time supporting disadvantaged residents by making local food more affordable. Currently, the Hub on the Hill is the only vendor that accepts fair food pricing discounts. They also accept SNAP and other food assistance incentives through their online and in-person marketplace. This is a big revolution for local food in our area. And we hope through the Fair Food Pricing Program to be able to continue rolling it out to other locations, such as farmers markets, brick and mortar stores, farm stands, and CSAs. The basics of the program are simple, yet innovative. Provide a convenient, affordable way for residents to buy food in the Adirondacks that is good for them, good for the environment, and good for the economy. It's a three for one. So that's a lot to take in. It's not the whole story, but it's a part of the story. And there's, of course, a lot more that could be said. But as Elizabeth said, we'll have to wait for another Lyceum series to talk about those other parts of the food system. But here's the punchline. We can each do our part. Each of us has a role to play on a daily basis. While I recognize that the examples I've given are very specific to the Adirondacks, the elements of these actions are not unique to here. Support local institutions that keep a closed loop on production and provision of food. Remember how food moves one way around, from production to processing, distribution to eating, and then money moves back the other way. If each person that receives your money along that chain can be local, the efforts will be your efforts will be magnified. So your role as a consumer is one you already know. That's probably tiresome to hear again and again, but it does have a big impact. Remember the poll that we did in the beginning. Those of you who were in the 0 to 10% column, try to bump yourselves up to 11% to 25% of your diet coming from your community. It's not easy. It's not always convenient. And for those of you in urban places, it takes some doing, but it will make a difference. You vote with your dollars, and you can vote for your neighbors and for their businesses. So I've got a couple resources here for you that Elizabeth can pop into the chat box. Links to these, to finding local food in the Adirondacks, to ADK Action's food security projects, also to a presentation telling you more about the Adirondack Food System Network, and a link to the future website of the network. And that is all I have. Looking forward to the discussion. Going to stop.
So much. Yeah, Racey, thank you. So I pasted those links into the chat. And for those of you, oh, there we go. I pasted those links into the chat. And for those of you who want to follow up, if you're always welcome to inquire, and we'll be glad to send them to you afterwards. So we do have a few questions. Thank you so much, Racey. It's really a complicated story. There are a lot of pieces to unpack, no pun intended. And it's you really did a nice job. Sort of that graphic is helpful to see the connection between the pieces of the story. So let's try a few of the questions. See if we can. tackle a few questions. The first one, it's a comment from Greg, says the net farm income table reveals counties where large dairy exists that is fed ag department subsidized. Oh, that is fed ag department subsidized, right? I don't consider those farms in the local area we are in. Can you answer that one or respond to that?
Sure. The stats that I gave were for the 8 counties or 9 counties that are part of the Adirondack Food System Network area. So we do consider them part of our region. St. Lawrence County has a lot of dairies, as well as Franklin County and Clinton County also have some dairies. So we definitely have dairies that are in our region, and their contribution is important. So yes, I do consider them in our region, and they do receive subsidies.
Thank you. Okay, Michelle has a question. Straightforward. Is the Hub on the Hill selling fresh produce this spring?
They sure are. You can go to they have a market on site, and they also have an awesome new online website.
Yes, great. I'm a beneficiary of that. Mary has a question. How can farm businesses in Essex County become more profitable?
Oh, Mary, you're gonna ask the easy question. That is a very difficult question to answer. I think it has a historical answer as well as a social answer. The historical answer is I'm not sure it is possible for them to be more profitable. Historically, there's a reason that we moved away from small farms. There's a reason we are not still a country that has a food system that is based on small farms. Now, some of that was policy related. And so there's some questions about, can we change policy so that the margins can be larger? History might tell us that it's not possible unless there's significant policy changes that show the real price of food. So on a macro level, having policies that take away the subsidies that make food so cheap, so that food gets more expensive, and then is more in line with what small farms are selling food for, and maybe then the demand goes up for small farms. But the reality is that economics would also tell us that economies of scale are what really give you your margins, right? The cheaper you can produce something and keep selling it for the same price, the bigger your margin gets. That's just not, we won't have small farms in that scenario, right? The economics tell us that we have to get bigger in order to get more profitable. From a social perspective, I see some benefit. I won't go on too long, but it is sort of the key question here. From a social perspective, I do see some possibilities for support to small farms to not necessarily make their margins any better, but make the livelihood more sustainable. So make it possible for them to pay their owners, make it possible for them to have some kind of retirement plan, or at least financial resources that doesn't include liquidating their assets. So I do think that there are social options for supporting the livelihood that doesn't necessarily make the margins larger, but makes it more possible for more people to lead their professional life in that way. That could be a whole Lyceum on its own.
That was my thought as well. That could be a whole series unto itself about what are steps that might lead us in that direction. So if that's a subject of interest, for sure, let the Grange know. Please interact with us. Let us, email, talk to Grange board members to let us know if that's of interest to you to pursue in the future. Racey, I need to go back and correct myself. Greg's question regarding the dairy says that I'm gonna read it again. The net farm income table reveals counties where large dairy exists. That is Fed Ag Department subsidized, right? I don't consider those farms in the local era we are in. So the era of local emphasis.
Okay. Well, yeah. Well, yeah, that changed my answer. It depends how you define local. The local can be a definition that is geographically bounded, so within a certain number of miles from the eaters. And if that's the definition of local, then they certainly fall within our 200-mile radius. You could also define local as farms that sell directly to consumers, which dairies are not allowed to do legally because, well, they'd have to, there's some legality issues with dairies selling raw milk. Many of you know the legality around raw milk is challenging. But I see those farms still very much as assets. Dairy is a huge portion of our diets. And if there is a way to bring them on board and offer alternatives to their current alternatives, we have seen a lot of interest, especially since COVID. We've seen a lot of interest in Farm Bureau conversations around dairy farmers who are like, people are coming to my farm and want milk because they can't get it at the grocery store as I'm dumping it out of my truck because I can't sell it to them. That's crazy. Like, there's policies that we can work on there to help create a system in which dairy producer can continue to be a dairy producer and potentially allow that product to come directly to the community instead of needing to go to a processor first. Or there may be other options, but I see them as a significant asset. Remember that slide where I showed the size of farms in Essex County? A huge percentage of those farms are very, very small farms, less than $2,500 in sales a year. Those farms can't feed us, right? There's too few. We have too few farms in the Adirondack Park. We need to depend on those farms on the outside, and we can work with them to change their practices.
Thank you. Catherine asks the question, will the families who received emergency food be able to transition to the new program of a sliding fee scale?
That's a great question. And yeah, we're in the process.
Let's repeat, go back a little, just one step to 64,700 meals were delivered. Do you know how many families that represents?
It's about 400, let me get this right. So there's 1,000. I don't want to say wrong. Jory is on the call. If she knows, she may be able to answer that question correctly. I want to say it's 1,000 individuals, and the average household size in our area is 2.2. So roughly 500. There you go. Thanks. Yeah, I think it's a little bit. There you go. Thanks, Jory.
Yes, 325 households is what Jory responded. Thank you.
And so transitioning from anything free to something paid is always a challenge, but they will have the opportunity to transition. And the numbers of incentives that Adirondack, that ADK Action is trying, and the Hub are trying to support people to access is significant. So SNAP, double up food bucks, and fair food pricing allows, in some cases, the cost of the food to go down by 65%. So there's been some real efforts to transition those people over to a sliding scale, but it depends on fundraising, right? So that's part of this. That's part of this loop.
So I would just ask that if you have suggestions for where a dollar would really count, go ahead and put those in the chat for any of you who have that answer of, if someone wants to write a check tonight to make sure that someone could get some food, where would they go?
Jory, can you put the fair food pricing link in the chat? That would be, that you can find it through the links that, I think if you put the links in the chat, Elizabeth.
Yes, I did. Yeah. Under
the ADK Action Food Security Projects, there's a link to the fair food pricing program, and donating there on their website is what I would recommend.
Okay, again, so that's the Adirondack Actions Food Security Projects is one of the links in the chat. So of you who I'm seeing some comments that people would like to be able to support local food and local families to buy local food. That's one way. That's one thing you can do.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you for that. Let's go back to the questions. Rich says, great program, great presentation. What are some innovative business models being discussed for the local farms, which provide a better standard of living for you dedicated farmers to keep you off social safety net programs? So you did kind of go into that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, innovative business model is a really good question. So there are only a few examples that I'm aware of nationally where small farms are able to transparently say our business model leads to profit. I mean, in general, food is just not a profitable business. There are some attempts at trying different things that have larger margins, and that allow greater profits, but that would be probably another Lyceum in itself as well. But I would be interested in talking to anyone who has business model ideas that still respect the sort of triple bottom line that we talk about: financial bottom line, a social bottom line, and an environmental bottom line. It's easy to come up with the business models that are purely financially driven. Those are not difficult, right? We know what those look like. But business models that allow for those three goals to be met, that you're environmentally beneficial, socially supportive, and financially solvent, those are really difficult.
Jory corrected herself in and says 235 households, not 325 households. Thanks, Jory. Mary Nell has a question. I've heard that there is a significant problem for local farmers in the lack of slaughter facilities in the region. Is this true, and how is this being addressed?
Yeah, the truth is, it's a good question. And whether it's true or not, I don't think there's a black or white answer. It would be much more convenient if there were more facilities that were closer, where slots to get your animals in to be slaughtered were more available. The case is that there are not very many, they are relatively far away, and they are often booked solid. But if you think about it from a business perspective, what business would want to run not on full capacity, right? So that it would always have open spots. You don't want to run a business that always has open spots. So could there be another one? Potentially. Well, let me say, Farm LLC's experience has been that there isn't enough, that the margins are too small for the small facilities to exist. And it would not be a large facility if there was going to be another one in the Adirondacks, for example, or in the edge of the park. It wouldn't be large, it would be small. And the question is both labor related. Can you find the skilled labor? Can you pay them and still keep your prices affordable for the small farmers? So facilities are limited. People have had challenges getting in their animals into slaughter, but the folks who do that regularly, so their business model, depends on getting their animals from the farm to the slaughter facility every year, they didn't have trouble. And in part, that's because they have relationships with those businesses. They have the slots scheduled a year in advance. There isn't a lot of drop-in availability. So, but I'm not sure you want to design a business on drop-in demand.
That is challenging, to say the least. Okay, another question from Catherine. Why do you think so many people who are eligible for SNAP or other subsidy programs are not taking advantage of them? Is it simply lack of knowledge of where to or how to apply, or some other sense of personal pride at not accepting a handout? So that's referring to the 900 people that you said who are below the poverty line,
but not receiving assistance.
Yeah.
So I've been working a lot recently with Adirondack Health Institute, and they were the ones who provided some of that data. And their understanding and our understanding of why those numbers are that way are a couple different reasons. One is what you said, Kathy, which is that people may just not want to have that kind of assistance from the federal government, even if they're eligible for it. That doesn't mean that they wouldn't be open to accepting assistance from local support, because there's often a difference in people's minds between federal support and local support. But a couple other reasons are because of the income eligibility limits. In some cases, for example, a family of two that made $20,000 a year, if they have $2,000 in savings, they are eligible for SNAP. But if they have $3,000 in savings, they are not eligible. So that it may be a question of when they applied and how much savings they had, whether they knew what those limits were, and so could they apply at a time where they had less savings. So savings is calculated when you do your eligibility for SNAP. They look at your savings, and so there's questions around eligibility that are confusing for people, and they may sometimes be eligible and sometimes not. The other thing that happens is that people may not know they're eligible because they just they haven't been in that category before, so they just don't know they're eligible. One of the issues for Essex County, at least, is that there is a program. There's there is a program that has to have a sponsor locally that does outreach education specifically to get more people signed up for SNAP. And in Essex County, there isn't an organization that leads that. So we don't have someone in Essex, an organization in Essex County that can lead SNAP education to get more people signed up.
Thank you. Question from Alice. Beyond access, some families have difficulty utilizing some food that is available to them. For instance, some people don't know how to cook and use a whole chicken or vegetables that are unknown to them. Are there programs that address this?
Yes, there are definitely cooking class education programs. CCE has them in different counties. ADK Action has—
CCE is Cornell Cooperative Extension.
Cornell Cooperative Extension has them in different counties. Also, ADK Action has done them. A number of different, like even primary care physicians will do them now, especially now that food insecurity is part of the state prevention agenda, and they can get money from the state if they have these programs that teach people cooking and teach support and education around cooking. Another way that it's being addressed, for example, through the Hub on the Hill, is that prepared meals can be provided to people. Especially, another problem is not only that they don't know how to cook, but they may only have a microwave. So even if you know how to cook, it's really hard to cook whole foods in a microwave to something that's edible. So it's not just the know-how, but it's also the equipment. And for a lot of elderly people, it's very difficult. Even if they knew once how to cook, it's very difficult to continue cooking. So prepared meals programs like Meals on Wheels, both sort of either end of the age spectrum, those for birth to 3, as well as those older meal programs for the elderly. Both those programs do a lot with prepared foods, and I think there's a big opportunity for more of those prepared foods to come from local, be sourced locally. And Jory and ADK and the Hub on the Hill and ADK Action and CCE are all working on that in Essex County, at least.
Great, thank you. Michelle asks, do you know what percentage of local farms' income comes from local distribution, i.e. CSA's farmers market? What do the local farmers need to do to meet the needs of the food insecure families in Essex County?
What percent of local farms' income comes from local distribution? I'm not sure I totally understand that, but I think what you mean is what percentage of their food do they sell locally versus elsewhere? And I don't know the answer to that question. My guess is that for the small farms, so farms that are under $100,000 gross sales, my guess is that 90% to 100% of their sales are local. And for those that are larger, your percentage of what you sell outside of the region gets larger as you get bigger. One, because there's just not a lot of people here, and that means there's not a lot of food dollars here. And because those economies of scale, as you get bigger, your margins get larger. So it's tempting to start selling outside of the community because your margins look better. the bigger you get. And then what do local farmers need to do to meet the needs of the food insecure families in Essex County? I'm not sure it's the farmers' jobs necessarily to meet the needs of insecure families. I think it's the farmers' jobs to provide food to their communities as they are able. If that means selling it, then they should sell it. If they're able to give it away, there are many ways to donate. Then there are a number of farms, particularly some of the larger ones, that are able to donate and jump through the hoops to get the tax breaks that you get from donating food. So I think that what farmers can do is, if they are willing to sell some of their product wholesale, for example, to the Hub on the Hill, so that the Hub can package it and sell it, get it out to people who need it, that is an option. But being a farmer myself, I very much understand the tension between, if you can get those retail dollars versus the wholesale dollars, right? Retail is more. If you can get those retail dollars, that's going to be more likely to keep you producing in your community for longer than if you do the wholesale, if you're small. It's when you get big that you can start to do a lot of wholesale. So that's a tough one.
I'm going to loop back around to a question that was I saw in the chat, and sorry for Sally for not bringing that up sooner. The comment is, great presentation, thank you. Can you talk more about the about boycotting big ag? Yeah,
good question. I think my, so if my suggestion in terms of what you can do is, if you were buying 10% of your food from your community, try to bump that up to the next level versus spending your energy on boycotting big ag, which you would be doing. If you increase the amount of local food you spend, you're more likely going to, especially if you live in our region, in the Adirondack region, you're going to be supporting small farms. So instead of actively spending your energy boycotting the big ag, I would actively spend your energy supporting the small ag. Now, on an urban scale or a national scale, certainly supporting any legislation, any advocacy campaigns that support policies for small, diversified, non-commodity farmers is a great thing to do. In terms of, I'm going back to the question earlier about dairy in our region, which I suppose you could consider big ag. I'm not sure. I think what COVID has showed us is longer if we can work together, and that given the rural, sparsely populated nature of our region here, we can't ostracize anybody. We need to find ways to work together across our differences. So those farmers have the reasons for being big and for being subsidized. Is there a way that we can bring them into the system so that the next time it breaks, like it did for COVID, we have those connections in place and we can figure out legally how to get that milk from going into the lagoons, get it to people who need it.
That's very, very helpful, Racey. It looks like your screen may be frozen. It's a little bit, oh, you're back. That's great. It's about 8 o'clock now. There are several links in the chat that I think people might find interesting. There's also a comment that's in the chat that says there are no nutrition outreach and education program. There is also no nutrition outreach and education program in Essex County. Essex is one of 5 counties in the state without a program.
That's the program I was talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that is another area that people might be able to take action, is to press for state funding to cover that need. We know it's a need. And for those of you inclined to make calls to your legislators or to have conversations with your supervisors and lean in onto that need to try and make sure that that's covered. That's another thing that you can do.
Yeah, I believe that that we don't have the institution that is well placed to lead it. But I would be happy to continue that conversation with anybody that's interested. Also, there are a number of folks at CCE who are working on it that I can put people in touch with if they're actively interested in that.
Absolutely. Okay, let's take one more question. It looks like there's a lot of comments in the chat, which is terrific. So keep track of, so if you would like to follow up, we'd be glad to send out more information about some of these upcoming, just keep an eye out for the news that's happening. Actually, that's a great question. I'll just throw in, Racey, what is the best way to keep up with news or development or needs that can support local farmers as well as help connect the dots to people who are hungry?
Yeah, I have a lot of hope that the Adirondack Food System Network will be able to provide that. I should have done so, but there is an engagement form that you can, I'll send it to you, Elizabeth, afterwards, and maybe you can send it out. If you want to become a general member of the Food System Network, we will have an e-list that broadcasts information about the food system, our local food system in general. So that at this point may be one of the best places. Otherwise you sort of have to pick your direction and then go that way. So if you're interested in food security, look at ADK Action, get on ADK Action's web e-list. If you're interested in production, CCE, Cornell Cooperative Extension, and the extension offices and Soil and Water have opportunities for engagement there, and information and listservs. The Hub on the Hills e-list also is a great way to, it's very concrete and practical. So you'll see a lot of the doings, like what people need and what they have, less sort of global systematic information, but more the nuts and bolts of how the system is actually working. Adirondack Harvest, thank you, Mary, is also another great one for information about local food availability and how to access it. That's a lot for people to try for. There's a lot of good work to be done in those connecting with those organizations. So I really encourage everyone to do that, to follow up in some way, one step. Remember at the beginning, Racey said, what we do matters. One thing matters. Everything counts. So just encouraging all to go in that direction. It's a great role for the Grange, whose historic association with local farmers goes a long way back. And so we hope that we can continue this conversation and just educating ourselves about these entangled systems and see if we can straighten them out, get them going in the right direction, or at least facilitate their untangling. All right, we have one more question and then we'll wrap up for tonight. We're a little bit past 8. It seems hard to justify individually driving to local farms to buy food because of the environmental impact. This year of COVID, I was unable to join a CSA. Just wondering if you have any suggestions to get local produce throughout Essex County besides the Hub on the Hill. The Hub on the Hill's delivery is a great option. There are a couple of farms that also ship UPS and FedEx. For example, Reber Rock, my farm, does that. We ship using UPS and FedEx. Tangled Farm does a delivery of their CSA, so they deliver throughout the region. Local food from your local co-ops is also a great option. It's one step removed, but being able to buy, what's clearly labeled as local is also a great option. I'm trying to think off the top of my head whether others actually deliver. The other thing I would say is get an electric car. Absolutely. Okay, Racey, I want to let you go. It looks like Echo Farm delivers. That's another one that's thrown in the chat. I wasn't aware of that. Keep sharing the information with one another. And as we look forward to spring and summer and being able to be back together in person, it'll be so exciting for us to resume visiting our local restaurants and keep making the restaurant owners aware of how much local food means to us. And that may not be connecting to people who are hungry in their homes, but it definitely supports local farmers. So
another thing that we can do going forward. Racey, I really want to thank you tonight for introducing us to this topic, and a lot of nice comments in the chat as well. So we look forward to hearing more about this and learning more about it ourselves. And that wraps up our Lyceum series for this winter. And thank you again all for sticking with us this winter through the virtual platform. And stay in touch through the Grange website. And feel free to make a donation to the Grange if this programming is what you want to see, and if you want to help us to make it stronger. So happy spring soon to all of you, and have a great evening.